Chapter 24, Lights and Lasers. Go! Kapow! Colin kicked out with all of his legs at once, sending the snake wrapped around him flying across the room. Without stopping for a moment, Colin scampered over to Mr. Penguin, grabbed the other snake by the tail and tugged hard. Mr. Penguin turbo-twirled on the spot as the snake rapidly uncoiled. Colin then swung it above his head and lobbed it across the room. Mr. Penguin was free! Dizzy, but free, and the two bamboozled serpents took one last googly-eyed look at Colin, then skedaddled away through the fireplace door. "Excellent work, Colin," said Mr. Penguin, straightening his nice adventurous hat. "Now we need to pull the plug on the Hypnotron." Mr. Penguin waddled over to the cables that ran into the big metal box with Colin hot on his heels. They gathered up as many of the thick wires as they could and pulled hard. Heave! But nothing happened. They tried again. Nothing. The cables were fixed tight. A more drastic plan was needed. Colin leapt into action, swinging himself towards the box and kicking it. Kapow! Kapow! But it wouldn't budge. He took a deep breath, summoned up all his kung fu power and headbutted it. Clonk! But all that did was dent the metal bit. Mr. Penguin started to do his panicky dance again, waddling about and flapping his flippers and yelping, "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, what are we going to do?" He guessed that soon the Hypnotron's hypnotic rays would have reached all the reflector panels and formed a glowing green web around the world. Colin was eyeing up the machine. The pad came out. "We'll have to try to break," he turned the page. The machine. Mr. Penguin stopped waddling and looked again at the huge Hypnotron. It was gargantuous, but there were open sections of it where the inner workings were exposed, so if they could fling something in there and disrupt the cogs and things, they might have a chance to ruin Dr. Mesmero's plan. As he scratched his beak in thought, the fizzing noise changed, and Mr. Penguin glanced up to see the thick laser beam split into hundreds of separate strands. It was connecting to the reflector panels around the world. The air in the room rippled and jiggled, and Mr. Penguin started to feel funny, like he was floating in jelly. Everything went wobbly and slowed down, and his head felt full of cotton wool. He couldn't remember what he was meant to be doing. He was being hypnotized. He shook his head. It was now or never. They had to break the machine. It was their only hope if they were going to save the world. And Gordon. The two adventurers looked around for something to throw at the Hypnotron. They needed a rock or a spanner or a tool of some kind, anything chuckable, but there was nothing useful lying around at all. Compared to Dr. Mesmero's workshop, this room was terribly tidy. As he turned, Mr. Penguin caught sight of the satchel on his back. His magnifying glass! He could throw that! He whipped it out of his satchel and looked at it sadly. What if it got broken? Colin rolled his eyes, snatched it from Mr. Penguin's flipper and hurled it at the machine. It clanged against it and bounced off and slid under one of the cages. Missed! Now it was lost, and they still hadn't stopped the machine. "Colin!" hollered Mr. Penguin, wild-eyed. "Can I throw you?" Scribblings. "No, thank you," said the pad. Mr. Penguin ferreted about in his satchel for something else to chuck, and his flipper found the stone they'd rescued on the hotel rooftop. Did he dare? What would Professor Stoutgirdle say if Mr. Penguin handed her a broken stone when he got back to Cityville? She probably wouldn't give them any money as a reward, so there would be probably no fish finger sandwiches. But he had to save the world from the bonkers Dr. Mesmero. There was nothing else for it. Mr. Penguin held the heavy stone in one flipper, eyed his target, and whoosh! Threw it hard at the devilish machine. Clonk! It hit the machine with an almighty clang, then bounced across the room and landed with a thump. It hadn't stopped the cogs inside, but the Hypnotron was now swinging around on its base. The hypnotic beam was no longer pointing up into the sky, but spinning wildly about inside the chamber. It made pew-pew noises as it blasted great holes in the walls. Dr. Mesmero ripped off her binoculars. "What are you doing?" she snarled angrily as the room filled with smoke and rubble. "You are ruining my plan." Before Mr. Penguin could think of a witty answer, the hypnotic beam swung around and fired the stone at something, and something extraordinary happened. The rock wasn't blasted to smithereens, but split open like an Easter egg. Inside, an enormous and very beautiful diamond sparkled in the green light. Mr. Penguin gasped, and so did Colin on his pad. Gasp. The beam hit the sparkling surface of the diamond, which, like a mirror, reflected it back. It zinged across the room and walloped Dr. Mesmero right in the face, sending her flying. As Mr. Penguin and Colin ducked, the machine kept on spinning wildly, and the beam hit the cable box that Mr. Penguin and Colin had tried to open moments before. There was a terrifying buzzing noise. The floor shook. Colin held his breath. Mr. Penguin held on to his hat. More smoke filled the room. Then the cable box and the hypnotron exploded with an almighty, earth-shuddering bang.